back, AP. All right, so let's get into it, shall we? Now, anyway, let's go ahead and discuss or pick up where we left off in class today when we were talking about Sophie the not Russian. All right, so we were talking about Catherine the Great of Russia, right? We talked about her appearance into the scene. We discussed how, she actually was a Prussian princess, but she is going to be the longest reigning female monarch in Russian history, flat out, all right, just before we can get there. But a big thing we also need to understand is she truly like like Frederick, right? Is she like Frederick the Great? Does she deserve a high grade when it comes to being a good enlightened absolutist, right? And that's what we're going to do when I see you again in class, is we're going to grade them, right? We're going to grade a lot of these enlightened absolutists on their ability to respond to enlightened society and lead their people in a way of the Enlightenment, right? Now, let's go ahead and look at Catherine's score sheet. Well, first of all, a la Peter the Great, she is going to continue to westernize Russia, right? She is going to attempt to bring in even more Western culture that was started by Peter the Great, and I believe that was Peter III's great-grandfather by this point, all right? So let's go ahead and jot this down, too. Let's make sure we know what day or when Catherine was in reign, okay? And that's going to be during the 1700s, all right? Catherine the Great. All right, so Catherine the Great... Ding, 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 ding. Here we go. Is going to rule from 1762 to 1796. So we're getting into the later half of, later half of the 17th century, right? We're running in that direction right now. Big thing we're going to talk about next is how society was massively different during this time period, okay? Now, interestingly enough, though, she is going to continue to westernize. She's a very, very big Voltaire fan. She actually invited him to have long stays and to live in the Winter Palace in Russia, corresponded with him at length. She took the encyclopedia that was banned in France and also by the Catholic Church, Diderot's Encyclopedia, and she actually had it published and translated into Russian and had it circulated throughout Russia because she believed that it was an educational tome that many needed to read and that actually people should have better access to education, right? She also bought Diderot's entire library. So Diderot had actually fallen on really hard times, right? Fell on really, really hard times, and he actually couldn't afford to keep working, so she goes up to Diderot and was like, hey, look, how about I buy your entire library? And he's like, well, I need my library, right? I need my library. I'm an Enlightenment thinker. I got to have my library. And so Catherine says, well, I'll pay you to be my librarian. And so she basically buys his books for him and then allows him to keep using them, right? So it's an amazing thing. She patroned his works, right? And she built one of the largest collections of art that the world had ever seen, of Rococo, and also the emerging amount of what you would call slightly romantic art during the time, Baroque art, humongous art collector, and saved a lot of art from falling into the wrong hands going into the French Revolution and the era of revolutions, right? And because of this, she now has one of the largest art museums dedicated to her at the Hermitage Museum, which is actually at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, right? She also brought in domestic reform, right? So she boosted the education system and created a separate education system, unlike anyone from any other country, and better than even Frederick himself. She created an education system for women, right? So she was like, our girls need to be educated as well, right? So, and also she limited torture, all right? She didn't abolish it, but she made it a very rare occasion or a rare circumstance, whatever occurred in Russia. And she also promoted religious tolerance, except for Jewish people. Now, she is going to allow large communities of other Christians that are not Eastern Orthodox, which was what was practiced in Russia at the time, to immigrate into Russia and bring those things about. Now, a lot of her domestic reforms were unfortunately cut short by a very large rebellion that occurred under her reign, okay? Led by this guy, Emelian Pugachev, right? And Emelian is right here. He led a huge peasant revolt against Catherine the Great, with him and a huge band of Cossacks and also a large band of serfs as well. Due to this massive rebellion. Oh, fun fact too, Emelian Pugachev, this guy right here, was celebrated during the Soviet era as a hero because he kind of went in line with the Soviet era idea of peasant rebellion and peasant revolt and things like that. And so celebrated as a hero later on, way after, this is in the 1900s. And also, during his revolt, he claimed that he was Peter III, that Peter III never actually left, that it was him the whole time, and that he was the long-lost king of Russia, right? And so what does Catherine have to do to this massive rebellion? She has to crush it, which she does. And her reaction to this is she actually gave complete control of the serfs and the peasants underneath noble boyar rule after that rebellion. Well, first of all, really quick big thing, boyars didn't technically exist anymore, okay? So Peter the Great technically outlawed boyars during his era, right? He actually turned them into this thing called the table of ranks, right? Where he ranked every single noble family from importance to lowest. And he actually basically outlawed the idea of being a boyar anymore, a landed noble in Russia being a boyar. So, but what Katherine responds to this with is she gives complete control of serfs after that rebellion, because now they're going to be viewed as dangerous, which is a really, really drastic, unfortunate thing. And also, she expanded and modernized the infrastructure within Russia, right? She is going to improve infrastructure by pushing the remaining Mongols out, chopping up land along with Poland. She does end up gobbling up a lot of Poland. And then also she has new canals built, new roads built, new other infrastructure abilities, and also has some of the earliest service roads being put in. A lot of people, though, believe that she did this only for taxes, right? Like that she actually created more roads, better infrastructure systems, so she could get to these larger farmers, or have her tax collectors get to larger farmers so she could actually gain more money for the monarchy, right? So she's a very, very intense figure, though. Actually, very, very intense figure. And we do bring her up again a little bit more in the next unit as well. But she's kind of a tough one, too, because it's like she also kind of, ends up... Oh, by the way, again, remember, in class, ask me about the picture. But she is a very intense figure, and she is going to continue to, again, like Frederick, do positive things, but also kind of limit the poor's role in life as well. And then you had one of the last families that we'll talk about in our Enlightened absolutist era. You had the Austrian Habsburgs, right? Now, some of you are like, man, it's been a minute since we've heard from the Habsburgs. You're right, it has been a minute since we've heard from the Habsburgs, but they're still very important, okay? Maria Theresa is going to become like the de facto Habsburg queen, right? So when she comes to power, I believe that's in 1761. All right, so Maria Theresa, let's look at her real quick. Maria Theresa, born 1717, died 1780, spouse 1736 to 1765. It's in the 17. I know that it's literally during the 1700s. Okay, so I believe it's during the 1700s, or like 1750s. Maria Theresa is going to be ruling kind of like a co-monarch along with her two sons, Joseph II and Leopold II. Now, she didn't rule with Leopold II, but again, Maria Theresa is a very famous figure because she actually had 16 children. Count them, 16 living children, which is insane. And she was married to the Holy Roman Empire, or a Holy Roman Emperor, who I believe was Maximilian the First, or it's Francis the First. So is it Francis the First? I think it's Francis the First. It's Francis the First. So she was married. Yep, Francis the First, the Holy Roman Emperor, right? Now, while Francis the First focused on the dying Holy Roman Empire and the crazy things going on in there, Maria Theresa basically served as a de facto queen inside of Austria, right? And she is going to raise her sons in the ways of the Enlightenment in order to aid the people, right? So Maria Theresa is a very important figure. This is her right here with her stylish white hair. And this, of course, is Marie Antoinette, and we will get to know her very well in the next unit. And then you need to understand, though, she did raise her sons in the form of the Enlightenment. She did seek to expand a lot of things. But a very important thing we need to understand is that Joseph II is the guy we really need to grade, right? So Joseph II is considered the most radical of all of the Enlightened absolutists, okay? Because he is going to do a lot of very intense things. He abolished the persecution of the Jewish people. He made it illegal to persecute somebody in the Austrian Empire for their Jewish heritage, right? He just said, okay, look, Jewish people, don't speak your native Hebrew in public, worship at home, etc., because he wanted to integrate them better into the economy to make more money. And this is actually after Maria Theresa died. And then also, he pushes this forward, pushes a lot of other economic reforms forward. He outlaws serfdom. He frees the serfs. I'm going to say that again. Joseph II freed the serfs in Austria and outlawed serfdom completely, allowing peasants to pay a rent to lords in cash, right? Now, it's not going to be a huge backfire under his reign, but it does become a huge backfire for the reign of his brother, right? Leopold II, this guy right here, actually has to reinstate serfdom to try and bring back order, because when nobles began to try and charge super high rents to those serfs and the serfs began to rebel, this actually happened after Joseph was dead, and Leopold II, his brother, has to end up bringing serfdom back, right? So we do believe that Joseph is the most radical of all of them, but the least effective at the exact same time. And the Austrians, though, are going to serve as an example to the limit to the Enlightenment, because their actions were fair. It was a good thing that he freed the serfs, but unfortunately, it wasn't super well received, right? So I'm also in the description down below. I'm going to link the crash course European history video for the Enlightenment, or for Enlightenment monarchs, right? And it's very, very good. But now we're going to change gears a little bit, and we're going to get into the second half of this unit, which is the growth of European economic systems, right? So we need to go ahead and write this down. This is this is a brand new, fresh page, okay? So rely on that little red notebook. You can have a new little header, or, I know Belanger, you can get you a nice new page on your Google Doc, or Gia, you can go ahead and get a new piece of parchment paper because you're writing this with a pen and quill in paragraph form. But the big thing, though, is that we are getting now into some new ideas, okay? So go ahead and write down as the beginning of this new section, the economic expansion of Europe, okay? Economic expansion of Europe. Say it again, the economic expansion of Europe, okay? So economic expansion. Now what we're going to get into, though, we got to discuss how the patterns of economies are going to drastically change during this time period. So Europe, during this time period of the early 1700s going into the French Revolution, extremely different patterns of how Europeans make money are going to appear, okay? Now, the College Board thinks I should teach this in the next unit, but I find that to be ridiculous because the College Board also wants me to teach the French Revolution, the era of Napoleon, and the Congress of Vienna in that unit as well, which I think is too much, all right? So this, though, I do feel is really important, because society is going to change in the 18th century. 18th century European society is going to change, and a lot of it is due to this thing called the Agricultural Revolution, right? Now, the Agricultural Revolution is going to be a dramatic break from the old way of farming and the old ways of making money during the Middle Ages, or during that money that was made during the Middle Ages, right? So money during the Middle Ages was made very, very differently. And as we know, agricultural societies were the base economy of European economic modalities during the Middle Ages, right? If you were making money in the Middle Ages, you were growing something, right? So you were growing something, and usually all of the money and the wealth was parlayed into the hands of or owned and locked down by landowning nobles, right? And the way that those nobles made their money was by dividing land up into small villages and then having the farmers or the villagers rent that money or that land from them in a set number of strips, right? So as you can see, whole villages would share the land even though the lords own that land collectively, right? So, for example, the Terry, if y'all were all of the serfs or the villagers that lived on the land that my family owned, which let's use me as an example because my family owns about 500 acres of land in North Carolina. So, let's say I own all of that land. Well, I can't farm that by myself. So I have my manor, which is up in the in the highest elevated point of the village, right? I'm all the way over there, and then I would create villages on each little spot of the land, and then I would then rent a certain number of strips of land out to each of your families, right? So you and your father, or you and your husband would own a certain set number of strips, right? And those strips are going to be divided up into every single family, and y'all are going to just farm the best you can on all of it, and I end up getting half of all things grown, right? So that makes me a lot of money because I can sell it back to the king, and he can provide me, and he then chops that up and distributes it throughout the kingdom. Now, here's the downfall, though, of this system. The old way is known as the open field system. That whole thing we just discussed is known as the open field system. So this right here is a visual representation of the disadvantages of that system. So if this was a village that was on my land, right, y'all all rented these little strips of land from me, all right? And there were massive disadvantages to the system. Disadvantages include the fact that every single year, at least 1 or 30% of your fields were left open to do the thing called fallow, right? Fallow means it would sit there and rest, right? So that you could plant again in the next year. Because in the early Middle Ages, they discovered that planting continuously in the same areas of land over and over and over and over and over and over and over again stripped the land of its nutrients, right? And killed the soil and the quality of the soil that was there, okay? So with this issue, now that we're leaving one field to just sit there, that's less than 30% of our yield, right? If this is 100% of what we can grow, now we just reduce that by a third because a third of it is leaving to fallow, right? So then you had another huge disadvantage is that you would usually grow one of two types of things, barley or wheat, right? And those things were very well known for stripping the land of its nutrients, right? And then also, you're going to see land wasted when oxen are, because these areas between where the ox had to turn to drag the plow again, this land is wasted. This land between the strips, because I subdivided it in strips up to all these different families, that land's wasted. All the animals are grazing on what you would call common land out here, and if one animal got sick, then animal diseases spread very quickly. Weeds were a really big problem. Draining was almost impossible. So this system was terrible, right? It was absolutely awful. But then, you got to understand, is that they're going to realize there has to be a way to grow things better because you got major problems. The crops that you were growing were usually wheat or barley, and barley is another word for like oats and barley, right? Wheat, barley, rye, okay, those are our grains, and beans if you had them, right? So population, though, unfortunately, during this time period, is going up. So what's happening to the price of bread? Now that there are more people, the demand is higher, which drives the supply down, which soars the price up, right? So England is going to start trying to figure out ways that they can farm better, more efficiently, and make more money. And what is the driving force behind revolution, economic development? It's a need, right? Needs drive invention, okay? They just do, okay? So the agricultural revolution is going to happen because of the disadvantages of that open field system. And the English and the Dutch are going to be the first ones to grab onto it and run with it, right? And a trend, the agricultural revolution truly began in about the 1650s, but it lasted all the way up until the 1850s when the open field system was completely eradicated, right? So what we're going to do, okay, you have to understand the earliest phases saw extreme adoption of a lot of different things. One of them being the enclosure system, right? The enclosure movement is when lords went out and they began to buy up all of that communal land, all those strips, and then they would subdivide that into individually farmed by certain families, strips in economically enclosed land. I'll show you a picture of it real quick. So let me go ahead and... This is what the enclosure movement looked like. Go. So, no. There it is. This is the enclosure movement, right? So one of the earliest forms of this economic agricultural revolution is you're going to see the lords buy up all of the land and subdivide it into small enclosed areas, and one family would be assigned to work an entire area. Now, some of you are immediately asking yourself, like, well, wait a minute, Mr. Terry, how is it possible that one family can pull off all of that? Well, you have to understand that they're going to do this because of a lot of new techniques that began to show up, okay? So the lords begin to buy up all of this land because of all these new techniques, okay? So let's discuss these techniques really, really quickly. Let's go ahead and move this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to bring this over here, and then... All right, so... All right, so let's turn to the board real quick, right? Let's go to our little magic board over here. Oh my God. Okay, I just almost had to buy a new computer. All right, so we're gonna look really quick at our new agricultural revolution techniques, right? So what they would look like. I know, sorry, little dinosaur. I know it's a pain in the butt because we've got no internet sometimes. But, okay, let's look at these new agricultural techniques, right? So first of all, one of our premier, biggest agricultural techniques, of course, was the enclosure movement, right? But the enclosure movement is going to be a slow, completely reorganizing of all of those open lands, right? Now, one of the bigger reasons why this is going to work out, a lot of it has to do with crop rotation. All right, so what ends up occurring or coming out of this, okay, crop rotation. Now, you have to understand, crop rotation is a massively important thing, okay? Crop rotation is what made better use of that land that was sitting there to rest, okay? And a lot of this is credited to this guy named Robert Townsend, all right? So Robert Townsend, also known as Turnip Townsend, is going to be the guy that realizes crop rotation is better, right? Crop rotation is better. It keeps the soil lasting longer. And what he would do is he would have this idea that would look kind of like this, right? And you would take all of your fields, right? And if we had enclosures right here, so here's our enclosed farms. We got the Salvaggios right here. You got the Mangiapanges right there. You got the Rollies right here. And then you got the Adamses right there, right? So here's our enclosed space now, right? So these landlords begin to gobble up all those strips, and then we'd subdivide that and be like, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to tell these poor farmers, sorry guys, what you're going to grow every single year, right? And Robert Townsend came up with this method of moving systems. Turnips, hence why it's called Turnip Townsend, right? You would grow turnips in one, and then you would grow wheat, and then you would grow barley or another type of wheat right there, and then you would grow clover, right? Clover. So we got turnip, wheat, barley, clover, right? So you would actually now rotate these things through. Now, why are these so special and why are these so beneficial? Well, turnips are really great because they reinvigorate the soil, right? Their turnips put off a lot of really positive chemicals for the soil, and they help reinvigorate everything, right? And also, they serve as a very good fodder for animals, and also they serve as a very, very hardy vegetable that can be grown even in the wintertime, right? They're a cold weather crop. So turnips are going to be grown in one. And then, of course, you know why we're growing our wheat. We're growing our wheat to make bread. We know why we're growing our barley. We're growing our barley to make bread. But here's the other one. This is what the crop rotation system hinges on, clover and turnips, right? Turnips help reinvigorate the soil and create a good cold weather crop that can be used all year round. Clover, some of you are like, humans don't eat clover. That's weird. Who eats clover, right? So, well, clover is not for you, y'all. It's for the animals, right? Instead of having that community property wasted, now what we can do is we can put some sheep right here, or some cows right here, or some type of animal. They eat the clover. As they eat the clover, they go to the bathroom. They are now be kept subdivided together with one another to prevent the spread of disease. And as they go to the bathroom after eating all the clover, what happens to the dirt? It gets fertilized, right? And so now next year, when you move your wheat into that field, you are now moving it into a freshly fertilized field. When you move your turnips into that dehydrated garbage dirt from the wheat, your turnips will grow well no matter what and reinvigorate that dirt. Your barley grows in the reinvigorated dirt from the clover or from the turnip fields, and your clover rotates through. So you just will begin to rotate these things around, right? The crop rotation system invented by Robert Townsend, or Turnip Townsend, is going to be a very, very big deal, okay? And another big thing is going to be drainage, right? So we are going to see the use of dams and dikes to actually block off rivers, prevent swamps, and create new fields, right? So this is going to give us more space to actually farm on, okay? So we've got the enclosure movement, we've got crop rotation, we've got drainage, right? Very, very big stuff. These are huge, 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 monumentous things that are going to change the game. And we're going to talk about a couple of these other things as well, one of them being Jethro Tull's seed drill. We're going to talk about some stuff like that. But those are some of our new techniques that you're going to see adopted in the agricultural sector of Europe, right? So crop rotation is probably the most important one, okay? Now, drainage, though, we left off with drainage. Let's pick back up off of drainage. Where did everybody learn how to drain things? From the Dutch, of course. Remember when we looked at Amsterdam at the very beginning of this unit? There's over 400 miles of canals, right? And it's a very, very watery, like it's a port area. They were able to build those canals and to grow their wealth and to improve their society and all of their, that was actually a pretty good little rotation. All of their, they were able to increase the number of places that they could grow by draining all of these areas, right? Because their population density began to go up because of the economic success, and also due to the fact that you had so many new religions coming in and religious converts going in because they were open to the public. So Amsterdam, and since these large cities are going to grow because of the East India Company, they had to figure out ways to drain the soul, right? They had to drain the soul out. And as we know, we already talked about the Dutch Golden Age, right? So I can go ahead and skip that. But as you can see, they need to figure this out, okay? So what they're going to do is they're going to provide for their people by draining the soil better, okay? And so since this is going to occur, other countries are going to begin to mimic the Dutch by draining their land, enclosing their land, and turning marshes into farmland and specializing their crops using crop rotation, right? And so looking at this, the Dutch were some of the first ones to pioneer it. Look at the size of that rabbit, all right? So that is a big, big rabbit. And I'm unfortunately sad to say that they're going to eat that rabbit, but it is what it is, right? So you're going to see, due to drainage by the Dutch, crop rotation, enclosure movements, right, happening, you're going to see agricultural output dramatically increase, okay? So, big thing going forward, though, also, you're going to see new devices that are going to be built that are going to help actually create these better, these different better planting methods, okay? This is one of the biggest ones, Jethro Tull, right? Some of the dads that are listening to me right now will be like, this is a really awesome band. They were a band also, actually, in the 1980s. This is a different group, right? Jethro Tull is an actual guy from England, right? And Jethro Tull invented this thing known as the seed drill, right? So the problem that came with planting wheat before Jethro Tull is usually what would occur is as you're gathering up your wheat to be planted, you would have to cast it, right? You would have to go like this, and you would just cast it everywhere. You would go cast, and you back up and cast and cast and cast and cast. What issues come from that is you lose a ton of your seeds due to the fact that they're being washed away. They're not being planted in the proper mounds of dirt. And so what's happening is you've got these seeds sitting out. They don't root, they don't germinate, and you get an issue, right? So Jethro Tull invented a device known as the seed drill. And what the seed drill did is it had a metal plow on the very, very front of the device, and it would be pulled by an ox, right? And that metal plow would cut into the dirt, and the vibrations of it rolling over the ground would dump the seeds from this hopper up here into the dirt, and then a small blade on the back would cover the seeds back up. So you just took a very, very inefficient system of everybody plow, everybody cast, and let's hope these seeds grow, to you're now drilling them into the dirt by cutting in the dirt, laying the seeds down, and then rolling the dirt back over top of it. You're also going to see specialized livestock breeding that's going to be innovated in England, where they're going to focus on specifically breeding certain types of livestock that survive really well. Sheep and cows being the specific one, right, for beef. By 1870, England was producing 300% more food than they did in 1700, okay? That is insane. While working off the land only went up 14%. So you're seeing a massive, massive output of agricultural goods, right? And because it was so powerful and because it was so famous, these agricultural revolutions are going to lead people like Parliament to forcing the enclosure of the remaining man in England to meet the demand of urbanization, right? Because here's the big thing. Now that we're enclosing stuff, jot this down, as you enclose things, as new tools became available, as drainage for new fields became available, as crop rotation became available, now you got an issue. You don't need as many people to work on farms. So you're going to have a lot of people moving into the cities, right? So a lot of people were moving into the cities in the mid-1700s, and by 1815, which is the end of the Napoleonic era, you're going to see a huge amount of people migrating into the cities. Now that you have so many people in the cities, you have to provide food for those people, and since population's going up, you also have to feed those people as well. And there's going to be negative impacts. The agricultural revolution is unfortunately going to have really negative impacts on a lot of the poor in Europe, and that's going to be you're going to have landless laborers because they now know anywhere to live, because if you're not the Salvaggios, the Mangiapangas, the Adams, or the Rollies, you got moved off of the village and you were told to leave, right? So you had to go find somewhere to work. And what ended up happening sometimes is you might be hired to work on one of these enclosures if they needed extra help, but you had to work from sun up to sundown, and you also had to work 6 days a week all year round. So you're going to end up with these people that have no land of their own, but they're just now rural laborers, right? You also are going to see unemployment skyrocket because of this, okay? And you're going to lead to this process of known as Proletarianization, which is the transformation of peasantry from landowners to landless workers, right? Because the thing about the open field system, no, you didn't technically own that land, but some of them did, right? Some of them owned that land because they bought it from the landlord, that little strip, but because Parliament was passing laws for landlords to just come and claim that land to enclose it, they were losing their land just from, the government passing laws against them. And then also, since you had these issues arising, you also ran into the problem of they might as well have owned that land because their rent was so high. And now that their rent is now gone and has been enclosed, and the land that I used to work with my family and that Malaya used to work with her family, and then we also split that With Alexis's family, it's now been collaborated, and now just Cassidy Swallow's family is working it. So we lost our land, right? So that's a really big thing. We will talk about this stuff. I know it's kind of confusing. I'll see you guys soon. Y'all have a good one.